So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, and that's Marshal Turbeville. Marshal is a battalion chief who works with the Russian River Battalion for CAL FIRE in the Sonoma and Lake Napa unit. And he'll be talking about modern area fire history in the Central Coast region. So the idea is to sort of move from Scott's characterization of historical patterns of fire in the Coast Range to talk about a little bit more of our more recent experience with fire events. Okay, Marshal.
Thank you. Good morning. So Marshal Turbeville, worked for CAL FIRE mainly as a firefighter. I was a Dr. Scott Stevens student prior to 2000. He left for Berkeley. I stayed at Cal Poly. So my experience is more on the suppression side, working in primarily the Central Coast region in the last 22, roughly 23 fire seasons. So first off, what is modern era fire history? And this is, I was thinking I'd go cut a bunch of trees down and count rings and do all that cool stuff, but Dr. Scott Stevens just talked about that. So there's all the research out there about return intervals and fire severity and all that type of stuff. I decided to fall back on what I know best, suppression, my experience there, and corresponding into modern fire history. So roughly for the last 100 years or so has been suppression, and that's different, just in a little word, versus management, suppression versus management. We've been putting fires out. Most of those fires were quickly extinguished as small fires, maybe a large spot, quarter acre, 10 acres or so. It's one of CAL FIRE's objectives, to contain all fires of 10 acres or less. And there's that difference between fire suppression versus fire management. And as noted before by the previous two speakers, there's also the increased population in the Central Coast region. So I don't know if you've ever taken the time to look at some of the statistics CAL FIRE has about the 20 largest fires. 3 of them are in Monterey County, which was already mentioned this morning, and I'll show you a map of that. And then 11 of 20 are in coastal counties. So this is the CAL FIRE statistics for the 20 largest, not most destructive, but the 20 largest fires since we've been recording data last 100 or so years. And 3 of those are in Monterey County. And I'll show you the map of those. And then there's the remainder that are in the coastal counties. So maybe a lot of people live along the coast. There's some people that say, hey, the coast can't burn. There's the fog. We'll talk about diversity of fuels, weather, topography a little later. But nonetheless, when you look at the 20 largest. Now, if we talk destructive, 7 of the 20 most destructive are on that list as well, 4 being last October, unfortunately, and 15 of 20. It's neat to note, if you look at the dates of these fires, they're a little later in the year, the fall, the Thomas Fire, not in coastal or central or in the central region here, but on a coastal county, that's the largest fire now in December of last year. So there's your coastal, Central Coast, and overall coastal most destructive. So structures, and also you see the number of deaths there. So Oakland Hills, 91, prior to that in the 60s in 1923. So just something to note there. So fire history really goes back to that one of the fire triangles mentioned this morning, weather, topography, and fuels. The weather is what it is. We'll talk a little bit more how it is along the coast. Topography is the lay of the land. And fuels are the arrangement of the vegetation. Fuels is just a fancy word for vegetation. Interesting to note, of those 3, we really only can change the fuels, and homes are fuels as well. So as we learn to live with fire, that's going to be key. So here's about the weather, and that's the actual Santa Rosa remote activated weather station that's melted by the 2017 Tubbs fire. Before we took it down, that's the melted wind vane there. Along the coast itself, afternoon onshore fog winds, cooler, moisture air coming onshore. Nonetheless, it could push a fire or drive certain fire behavior in some of the more interior counties like Lake County. And then we have these offshore wind events, these north winds. Northern California is equivalent of the Santa Ana winds in Southern California. And so you see such things as red flag warnings. You note on here, it's mostly the upper elevations above 1,000 feet or so. But these winds, when they surface, it puts firefighters on notice. People should be concerned, and that drives a lot of our fire history. Matter of fact, when I talk about Sonoma County, a lot of our Sonoma County fires are orientated north-south or northeast to southwest, pushed by the north winds. And you see this here if you look at smoke for the geysers fire in 2004, all the smoke's going offshore. It's an offshore wind event that causes these fires to spread dramatically. And in summary, I'll talk about a theory I have about one bad afternoon. So, and there's what October 2017 looked like with the offshore push of the smoke. So weather, topography. This is showing you the fog coming in, roughly 1,000 to 1,500 feet, depends. It's different up and down the coast a little bit, but that's roughly where the fog comes in. So anything above that line of demarcation, above the fog, below the fog, it's a change in vegetation, change in fire history. When the fog is gone, maybe for 7 days a summer, 14 days, whatever it might be, the fog has an influence, topography. So just maybe a mile inland from the coast is different than 10 feet on the coast. And I think a lot of people know this. 20 feet above sea, 20 feet above the sea versus 500 feet above the sea versus 2,000 feet. In some of our coastal counties, there's a dramatic increase in sea level straight up. Mount Diablo, some of the biggest mountains, Santa Cruz Mountains. And so you see here, 2016, late September, the Loma fire. The left side of that hill there is the Santa Clara County. That is the county line, Santa Clara. And on the unburned side, the right side, I don't know if you can see some of the retardant drops down in here on the screen there. That's the Santa Cruz County side. So there's a change in topography, which changes fuels, which then changes fire history. And that's primarily that fire burned, didn't come across the county line. And you'll see on some of the fire history. Last is fuels. Remember, we can manage the fuels or do our best to manage the fuels, or by putting fire out, that's also managing fuels. And in the summer of 2015, you'll see 3 major fires in Lake County, and Chief Bertelli will be talking about the Valley Fire later. When the fuels are dry, and we have various indices like energy release component, that's going to drive fuel of the fire as well. So fuel-driven fire. And here with a little bit of wind, drought, as you see here, knobcone pine, you talked about the fire ecology of knobcone pine. But this hasn't burned in, I'm going to say 80 years. It almost burned in the Tubbs fire and the Pocket fire. They were kind of going to come together at this point where I took this photo. But that's a blowdown area in the knobcone pine up on the county line of Sonoma and Lake County. And sudden oak death's been talked about, but that's a factor out there, and who knows what may be coming as far as insects or with warmer, or the weather whiplash theory with warmer summers and flooding in the winter. The other thing I've noticed as a firefighter is the recovery of vegetation regrowth after fires. It's even worth noting the 2015 Valley Fire in one county away, Lake County, versus 2017 here. This is Shiloh Regional Park in Sonoma County. How it's not as barren even now, 6 months later, as it is 2 years later in Lake County. So that, you know, whether it's the soil conditions or the weather conditions with the fog or moist air, we get the regrowth a lot quicker as well. Maybe that's why coastal live oak likes it here. Okay, so I'm going to take you through a couple of counties here in the coastal area, starting off with Marin. None of these maps show all the fires that burned in Marin, just some of the more notable ones. So undoubtedly, there's fires that you know about that are recorded in the trees, how they're started. I'm not going to go into all, you know, this is suppression era, modern era, so the last 100 years or so. But 1923 was the Ignacio fire there. It's shown in that, you see black striped area there coming off Mount Tam, same day as an Oakland Hills fire, coincidentally. Tells you it's an offshore wind. Look at the orientation of these fires, okay? Pretty much blowing offshore. Division fire, thank God for the ocean, it stopped. So looking at some of the headlines, this is off Marin County as a great fire history website. Some of these headlines are like, because it's 2017, okay? Wildfire on September 17th burns from Ignacio through Lucas and Nicasio valleys to Woodacre, Lagunitas Ridge. This happened at the same time as huge fires burned in Sonoma County and Berkeley, along with 15 other counties in California. Could have just changed that date. Probably going to happen again. Maybe it'll happen sooner. So here's the Vision fire specifically. On the coast, RH at 5%, winds 40 to 50. So thankfully the ocean was there. 3,500 acres per hour. Okay. Here's a HASBROUCK fire, 1904. So kind of on, maybe weren't as good as fighting fire back then, especially when the wind's not in our favor, but burned down the whole Marin County coast, more or less north-south orientated. People don't remember, we forget, we don't pass it on. The other thing that's neat to look at, dendrochronology, looking at tree rings is neat, but then comparative photography of before and now. So this is 1923 Mount Tam. I didn't know Mount Tam had that many rocks on it. It's really overgrown now, or I'm going to say really overgrown. Let's just say the vegetation's grown up now, and you can't tell all those rocks are there. So that was Marin. Here's Santa Cruz County, that county line. It's where you see all those accumulation of fires here in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So it's not really in Santa Cruz County. It's in Santa Clara County, but you have the Lexington in 1985, which is pretty destructive in July. Just during Gulch, July of 1961, and the Loma fire, which I showed you a photo of, September of 2016. And then the Summit fire, May 21st. Of 2008. I remember I was in Riverside County teaching a class. It was raining in Riverside. On the news, we're watching a fire ripping in Northern California in late May. That's an early start to fire season, the fire regime around here. Also, the small fire called the Trabean fire. Just want to point out, caused by a vehicle, 75 structures, 590 acres. That's going to play in later to this one bad afternoon theory, a fire scenario. Here's Monterey County. Probably because of roads. It's also a national forest with those portrays. If you can look at some of those colors, and this is the problem why I didn't show every fire on every map, but some of this land has burned out 4 times in modern fire history. So when you talk about the chaparral response, the chaparral community, what Dr. Scott was mentioning, the soil conditions, everything else, maybe it all didn't burn if you looked at the fire severity intensity, all with high intensity conditions, but some of these areas now are burning, you know, every 20, 30 years, 40 years, okay? Hopefully that's not the way of the future. Some are naturally ignited, lightning, even though it's not common here in the coastal area, the Basin and Kirk complex were lightning. Maybe more fire management or fire suppression, roadless areas, wilderness, not as populated, but I know the Soberanus fire 2 summers ago was a difficult one from a firefighter or fire suppression point of view to contain. So mention real quick, someone mentioned the 2008 lightning event. This is 2008, June 22nd of a couple, just 10 years ago now. All these fires started, and that's when some of Monterey County burned. So that's a scenario, if we did get lightning, natural ignition, how that comes into play. Not frequent. 1987 was the most notable year prior to 2008, but it is a possibility. So, and they're showing you the Indians fire, Monterey County, from the Highway 101, middle of June. Here's Lake County, and Chief Bertelli will talk about the Valley Fire specifically. You can see the Fork Fire in 96, my second year with CAL FIRE. Knobcone Pine, that's when I first, man, that's like the first biggest fire in my career. You know, they keep talking once in a career fire. Once in a career fires are happening like every year now, or every month last summer. It's getting more and more common, that term. It's probably a bad term, or our careers are changing. So the Fork Fire, and then a lot of this was 2015, starting off with the Rocky, Jerusalem, I could just do this backwards, and then the big one, the Valley Fire, which will be talked about. I've been to the 2000 Hidden Fire, so I included it in there. I saved some goats on that fire, but that was another wind event, Hurricane Linda. And prior to that, everyone talked about this Widow Creek Fire. At that time, the division chief up there, Jim Wright, and I had a conversation before the Valley Fire happened. I think it was before even, because we're in the drought years now. Earlier in 2015, we talked about Widow Creek, and where it started in the brush, wind event, pushed down, parallel to the Sonoma Lake County line, and how that would be bad. And when Chief Bertelli will talk about the Valley Fire, it kind of exceeded all expectations. Here's Napa County. So Dr. Scott Stevens talked about the 81 Atlas Fire. That's shown there, hard to maybe see there, but it's in this black hashed area on these on the map. And then the red area, I showed all the current fires in red. So that's the October 2017 Des Plaines Atlas Fire versus Atlas Peak. Similar footprint, north and south orientated. The 64 Hanley, which started on Mount St. Helena, also in that same black hash as the 81 Atlas Peak. And then this is the 2017 Tubbs. I'll talk more about this in the Sonoma County slide. And then we have the Nuns Fire, which is a conglomerate of multiple fires the night of October 8th into the morning of October 9th. But you can see how those wind patterns come into play. And also, Napa County has the influence of the Rumsey Canyon fires under north winds, the 16, and the Rumsey. We used to go to Rumsey almost every summer as well, and you can see it on the map up here too. Remote area, not as populated. Barriers, places to stop fire, not as frequent. But overall, those fires were dominated, a wind-driven, wind-dominated fire. So here's Sonoma County, October 2017, kind of center stage. Notice the major north wind orientation. The only one here that doesn't kind of fit that mold is the 78 Creighton Ridge, which is out in the area I serve now in the Russian River Battalion, August of 1978, still talked about locally. That's what you see here. And then you got the Pocket Fire from October 2017, the Tubbs from October 2017, and then the Nuns from October 2017. You also can see here some other fires. The 2004 GEYSERS fire is kind of orange colored, yellow colored in there. Another one that was pushed by the winds, came from ignition in Lake County, and blew down Pine Flat Road, took out some homes. So here's Sonoma County. You could take this picture and make it almost 2017, but this is 1964, showing you with the Mount St. Helena here, the Hanley Fire. You see the Nuns Fire over here. Notice that smoke isn't going way up into the sky like a big towering convective column. It's sheared off, wind-driven, offshore winds. Okay, took talking with Augie Grubb, the chief of Knights Valley Volunteer Fire Company in eastern Sonoma County at the base of Mount St. Helena. He was there in '64. It took that fire, which was primarily burning down the east side of Calistoga, It took that fire almost 24 hours, a good 16 to 18 hours to make it from there, from Mount St. Helena to Santa Rosa. October 2017 did in about 4 hours, and it actually jumped over Highway 101 to Coffee Park, so more destructive. So here's the comparison of 64 nuns versus the 2017 nuns. Remember the 2017 nuns is a conglomerate of multiple fires, but nonetheless, you can kind of see the orange outline is 1964 nuns, the same night as the Hanley, and the same. When I heard these fires start happening that night when I was working, I was like, someone's recreating 64 on us. Maybe it's just something natural. So same kind of ignition pattern. Here's, if you haven't seen it, in the red there is the 2017 Tubbs fire with Santa Rosa down here on the lower left compared to the 64 Hanley fire. So the Hanley fire was on Mount St. Helena, burning down the east side of Calistoga, and then kind of blew up on a late Sunday evening, about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and marched into Santa Rosa all day Sunday. And in 2017, that was started right around this area, and it took about 4 hours to get there, 4 to 6 hours. And that's where it crosses over 101 as a human-made barrier and gets into the Coffee Park area. I've been told in 64 they lit backfires, intentionally lit fires to stop that fire. Not really an option in the modern era to do that type of thing. We would have, threatened the Hilton Round Bar and all that. In hindsight, it burned anyway. But, that all would have been threatened by our ignited fire. Plus, there was no guarantee people are out of that area. And unfortunately, there was some loss of life in that area as well. So we don't have backfire as a necessarily option when there's homes and people and all those unknowns and uncertainty, plus just nature being in control that night. Little unknown, maybe I'm not predicting foreshadowing 2018, but the following year in 65, one windy night, September 16th and 17th, late fall, 120 mile an hour winds on Mount St. Helena. It might have actually been stronger, but that's when the weather station blew over. And Pocket, wow, another Pocket fire. Foot Ranch, the other part of Knights Valley that didn't burn in 64, burned in 65, the Foot Ranch fire. And the Crane fire, which is real similar to 2017, I think they were calling it the Presley fire. Other fires happened in the west part of the county as well. Austin Creek, Eastman Lane, Stornetta Dairy, which Stornetta Dairy burned in the Nuns Fire of 2017, another Nuns Canyon fire in Coleman Valley. So it can happen back to back. These are weather-driven events, fire history weather-driven events. And check this out, it wasn't just Sonoma County again, it was all the neighboring counties as well. So just like in 1923, 2017, 1965, it was the adjacent counties as well. So what about the saying that when it's really dry, worst fire season ever, when it's really wet, worst fire season ever? Is there a correlation? Or is it always the worst fire season ever? Okay. Well, if you go back to 2017, there was actually flooding in Russian River. I work in Russian River. This was the flood monitor. This red shows it barely just going into flood stage in early January. So maybe it's the weather whiplash phenomenon where we're going to get these, a lot of rain in the winter, flooding, real high intensity rain events. And then in the summer, we get these warm, windy events. But this is flooding going on in the Russian River. That's 4 to 6 feet deep, covering some of the grapevines there. That's in 2017. So we did get some rain. Here's a barn. I don't know if you guys can see it. I'll zoom in. That on the side of this barn, they've marked high water levels. And I don't have a picture in Humboldt, but I know along the 101 somewhere, there's also, I think it was 64, a high water mark in 64. So this is after the bad fires in Sonoma County in 1964, the Hanley fire being the most prominent. That December, a lot of rain. And you didn't know what happened in 65. That one windy night, September 16th and 17th. So in summary, I'll leave you with a couple thoughts. Okay, we're on the 20 largest fires in the coastal areas for most destructive large acre. You've heard already about fire behavior diversity, that fire triangle of fuels, weather, topography, and that diversity we have. The people live here. We've got to learn to live with fire. That's the population. This term pyro diversity, the more acres now are burning under high intensity or under unnatural conditions than maybe what historically how they burned. And that's kind of getting off my firefighter experience and going into my little bit of my forestry background, where it's not just a green tree or black tree. There's some scientific names there. And it's not a thing of whether it burned or didn't burn. Within the burn area, there's there's diversity. It's not just black or white. And so, double-edged sword. We get the benefits of the coastal weather and maybe a lower frequency of large fire. We get lulled, complacent fog, cool, moist, green, lush. But when the fires do occur, and I'm going to tell you, fires in the Redwood region, 2003 canoe and honeydew, hard to control. A lot of fuels accumulation. We don't have good places to stop those types of fires. They eat firefighters up as far as how much it takes us to contain those fires. It's difficult. The theory about one bad afternoon, all it takes is one bad afternoon. Firefighters can't mobilize quick enough. We can't get there. Even if it's just one fire in some areas on the coastal areas, because of travel times, topography, and such, it can all happen in 4 to 6 hours. Okay? Even if there's a 1 acre fire, you could have 3 homes threatened, and we don't have 3 fire engines in 3 homes. And if we did, we're forfeiting, stopping the edge of the fire, called perimeter control. It could happen in one bad afternoon. So we need to change the way we think, that you need to prepare for that one bad afternoon, as well as the siege scenario when there's multiple fires across a large geographic area. Also, firefighters are stretched thin until help arrives from elsewhere in the state, if it's possible. But the siege scenario, too, where there's multiple fires occurring. I want to also mention a second burn period, because it did happen on the canoe and honeydew fire. A lot of places we talk about the afternoon is the warmest, driest, and perhaps windiest time of the day. Actually, when it's real windy, like a north wind, it's 24 hours a day, good burning. But usually it's just the afternoon when the sun angle, northern hemisphere, southern aspect. But at nighttime in some coastal areas, all that warm air that's inland now starts flowing back offshore, and we get the second burn period, middle of the night. Now, did it come into play in 2017? Perhaps. We also had a dominant wind event. But firefighters aren't also out there at all hours of the night. So when it does happen on a fire, like the double fire, 55 fire shelter deployments, because got caught a little bit off guard, real benign fire behavior. Actually, we're trying to do a fire in operation, and then someone flipped the switch. All the warm, dry air from the Central Valley, San Joaquin Valley, came back offshore. Devil Fire was in the East Bay, Alameda, Contra Costa County line out there by Mount Diablo. So that second burn period late in the night. So I'll leave you with that. I think a little bit under time as far as question goes. I think we're going to do a panel discussion as well. So thank you.